may be seated. Thank you. State may provide the closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. 2,864 days. That's how many days have gone by since Victoria Prokopovitz went missing. She never made Marcia and Andy's 25th anniversary celebration. She missed seeing her son Wes get married to Bree in the last year. She never got to see her daughter, Stacey, become a grandmother to her 2-year-old grandson. Now, on that day, April 25th of 2020, between April 25th and April 26th of 2013, a long time ago, this family has grieved for the loss of this woman. They have searched for their mother. They've lost time with her. They've lost holidays with her. They've regularly kept in touch with law enforcement, offering any information that they had. And I'm talking about Stacey, Marcia, and Wes. While this family has been grieving, there's another member of that family, someone who hasn't been the same. Somebody who's moved on with their life, someone who's benefited from Victoria been missing, somebody who hasn't reached out to law enforcement to the point that searchers even viewed that normally family looks for answers, but a layperson who didn't even know James Prokopovitz saw that he wasn't looking for answers. Now, while this family was grieving, while this family was looking for answers, the entire time, the defendant, from the beginning, said, "She is gone. She is dead. You are wasting your time." And ultimately, to a couple of lay citizens who didn't know Vicky, and they didn't know Jim before they happened to be housed with him at the Brown County Jail, that he indicated to them that he was 100% certain that Vicky is dead. And furthermore, that they're never going to find her body. Ladies and gentlemen, this case that you sat on as a jury is important, but it's not difficult. And the state has the burden to show you why that is. And we intend to do that. Thank you. Thank you from the state, from Assistant DA Caleb Saunders, myself, from law enforcement, from Special Agent Jay Yergis, Sergeant Roman Ehrenstein, and the friends and family of Victoria Prokopovitz for taking time. I know both parties appreciate the time and attention you gave to this case. And that is so important because as a prosecutor, when you work on a case, you get to know a case, become familiar with the facts, get to know the family. You are waiting for the closing arguments because as we presented this case to you in the beginning, and we purposely and methodically presented the case we did, we knew what the evidence was in the case. We had the burden, but we wanted to take the time to allow this defendant, through their defense, to hang himself a little bit further, to let him continue his lies for the first few days of this trial, knowing that by the time you heard his statements and you heard from the pivotal testimony of private citizens that came forward with information they knew made a difference, they knew was important. That by the time you heard that this week, you were ready. And we saw the time and attention that you took to this case. We noticed some of you wrote a lot of things down, some didn't. Everybody has a different way of absorbing and listening. We could tell that you gave attention to this case. And that is so important. Because when instances of conduct like this occur in our community, and this is a criminal case, not civil. Sometimes I bump into somebody at the grocery store after, and they're like, yeah, who did you represent? I don't represent the family of Victoria Prokopovitz. Our office works alongside law enforcement and gathers the facts, evidence in a case to present this to a jury just like you. And as we present this case, and the state does have the burden, we accept that in this case, it is you, as the triers of fact, who are to evaluate the evidence, determine what occurred in this case, and seek the truth. And we know that you're going to do that. And if, by chance, I say something now, or Attorney D'Angelo says something now, and you think, that's not really what I heard, disregard us. Because it is what you heard in this case that matters. You are the triers of fact. But as I thanked you for serving as jurors in this case, we thank you for the attention you gave. Because many of you may have had work, family, other obligations. We're sitting here at 6 o'clock at night in the second week of this, but it is important. And as we watched you through the trial, we could see that you were listening attentively to the witnesses. And that's what the judge instructs you, that you are to listen to any of the testimony, because as he instructs, testimony is evidence, and any of the exhibits properly admitted to make your decision in this case. And as we indicated, this is important to the defendant as he sits here. He is charged with 4 offenses. But we'd also submit the defendant in this case is here because of his own words and his own actions. Now, some of you may have listened to this case. Maybe you've listened to some of the evidence, or you kind of saw some of the witnesses we called in the case, and you thought it was very foreign to maybe your lives. But that's not what this case is about. This case is about you evaluating the credibility of the witnesses that came before you, evaluate the evidence that was admitted, and find the truth in this case. You see, the state and law enforcement doesn't attempt to hide anything. That's why at times you might have thought, gosh, they brought that up, and I don't know, that's not real helpful for them, the defendant saying, I didn't do it, with denials. But you see, we're here, the state, for the truth. And that is the testimony and evidence that we've offered to you in this case. And I'd like to talk to you about what that's about. First, we do have the burden of proof in this case. The defendant is charged with 4 counts. And a lot of times, lawyers sit up here, have some kind of fancy formula for juries to figure out how you can evaluate what happened. But the state would submit it's not really much different than what you do in your own lives. And in particular, this is a case that I would say reflects that. How do you know who's telling the truth? And how do you know who's giving you a line of bull? It's something you see every day, and it's not difficult to see where the truth is. James Prokopovitz is charged with count 1, first-degree intentional homicide. There are 2 elements to this. First, the defendant caused the death of Victoria Prokopovitz. And second, the defendant acted with the intent to kill Victoria. Cause means that the defendant's act was a substantial factor in producing the death. Second, intent to kill means that the defendant had the mental purpose to take the life of another human being or was aware that his conduct was practically certain to cause the death of another human being. And that knowledge and that intent, as the instruction indicates, can form in an instant. Just like somebody who's quick to trigger, quick to anger in an instant. Now, there's a lot of talk, and I think in the defense opening statement, when Mr. Saunders was addressing what the state intended to bring into this case, and he told you this was an 8-year investigation searching for the truth of what happened to Victoria. And at that time, the defense in their opening indicated you're not going to hear how it happened, what happened, and that there would be no proof of a body. Well, ladies and gentlemen, from the beginning, and this is where I go back to, the state presented its case knowingly and methodically and strategically. From the beginning, when we selected you in voir dire, my last question was to you, if in fact you believe that the state has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt, according to the elements and instructions of the court, would you be unable to find the defendant guilty simply because there's not a body? There was no show of hands. And we knew that we selected individuals that were going to follow the law. And the law is that this charge is these two elements, that he would have caused it and acted with intent. As I go through the evidence, I'm going to present to you how we know that he intentionally did this. The second charge that the defendant is charged with in count 2 is obstructing an officer, giving false information. There are 4 elements to this offense. First, the defendant knowingly gave false information to an officer. A sergeant is an officer, like Roman Ehrenstein. 2, the officer was doing an act in official capacity. Officers act in an official capacity when they perform duties that they are employed to perform. The duties of an officer include interviewing witnesses while investigating a criminal matter. 3, the officer was acting with lawful authority. Officers act with lawful authority if their acts are conducted in accordance with the law. In this case, it is alleged that the officer was interviewing witnesses while investigating a criminal matter. And 4, the defendant intended to mislead the officer. This requires that the defendant knew that this officer was an officer acting in an official capacity and with lawful authority, and that the defendant had the purpose to mislead the officer in the performance of his or her duties. It is not required that the officer was misled. For purposes of the jury understanding the allegation, this has to do with the facts that were presented regarding the fact that Kathy Friday, James Prokopovitz, had given information obstructing the investigation into the disappearance of Victoria based upon the circumstances of the relationship. And more importantly, and you might have gleaned this when we asked questions, the timing of when this occurred. Why? Because the state asserts that that was a motive for why Jim Prokopovitz got rid of his wife. And count 3. The defendant is charged with conspiracy to commit perjury before a court. 3 elements. 1, the defendant intended that the crime of perjury before a court be committed. The crime of perjury before a court is committed by one who, A, the defendant orally made a statement while under oath. We're alleging that occurred in that evidentiary hearing that was testified to. B, the statement was false when made. This isn't a difficult charge, ladies and gentlemen. The defendant has admitted that he was in this hearing and that he had made a false statement under oath. C, the defendant did not believe the statement to be true when made. You heard the testimony and the information that Kathy Friday gave, as well as the defendant regarding them going to the courthouse on that morning, that they talked beforehand and agreed to lie to the court. D, it is not a defense to a prosecution under this section that testimony which constituted perjury at the time it was given was subsequently corrected or retracted. That's important, actually, in this case, because they both then did admit they did it. That isn't sufficient to then not find them guilty of this. E, the statement was made in a proceeding before a court. It was testified to that this was before Judge Seidmulder in the Brown County Courthouse on that previous date. And F, the statement was material to the proceeding. You heard testimony from numerous witnesses that outlined the concern that this information, that this relationship, that the lack of forthright of them coming forward with respect to that not only delayed the investigation, not only obstructed the investigation, but it was something that was preventing in a knowing manner by Kathy Friday and James Prokopovitz police from understanding what had happened in this case. And that perjury, although finally discovered, was something that obstructed police for years. Now, actually, with regard to these elements, the second element of the conspiracy to commit perjury is that the defendant was a member. So, number one, the defendant intended the crime of perjury before a court be committed. Two, the defendant was a member of a conspiracy. Again, we're alleging that's with Kathy Friday to commit the crime of perjury before the court. And that three, one or more of the conspirators performed an act toward the commission of the intended crime that went beyond mere planning and agreement. So what this means is somebody could be charged with this if they just agreed to do it. They didn't have to complete the act. In this case, James Prokopovitz and Kathy Friday both completed it. We don't even have to show that, but in this case, it happened. And now, count 4, perjury before a court. So you understand and don't wonder, well, why in count 3 is it conspiracy to commit perjury before a court? And why in count 4 is it now perjury? They are in count 3 being charged for the agreement to commit the act. The perjury now in count 4 is them actually lying under oath. And there are 5 elements to that. First, the defendant orally made a statement while under oath. Again, we had testimony here about that proceeding. 2, the statement was false. We, in some cases, would have to argue it's false. In this case, there's a statement from Mr. Prokopovitch acknowledging that it was false. 3, the defendant did not believe that statement to be true when made. We have that statement. That's why we played that video statement for you to see that Mr. Prokopovitz acknowledged he knew he was lying, and he did it anyway because he knew how it was going to look for him. And 4, the statement was made in a proceeding before a court. 5, the statement was material to the proceeding. Again, you heard numerous witnesses testify and outline why that information was important. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we talk about this trial and the 2 weeks that you've been here, the state has the burden. We hear this in all their cases because we do have the burden. The defense doesn't have to do anything. It is the state's role in these cases to call the witnesses, bring forth the evidence, bring forth the testimony, to show you and allow you to see why we believe that the defendant has committed these offenses. The judge will instruct you, and actually has, that you can't look into a person's mind to find intent. It must be found from all of the facts and circumstances in a case. And what's important in that, particularly in a case like this, is I think it is a case ripe for the argument that it is the actions It is the words. It is sometimes the inaction that allows you in this case to see the truth. And the truth is what you're to search for. As the judge has instructed you, you are not to search for doubt. You are to search for the truth. In this case, the state outlined through the testimony and evidence what occurred on the evening of April 25th, that Thursday night, 2013, into the morning of April 26th of 2013. You heard from various lay witnesses. You heard from friends of the family. You heard from the family. You heard from the family of Vicky. You heard from the family of Jim. You heard from law enforcement officers. You heard from private citizens from Pulaski, a small community, a tight community. This isn't Chicago. This is Pulaski. People knew each other. They were neighborly. They helped each other. And that's the rural area that this case came out of. And as you heard from officers who followed up on the case, sometimes they have to look hard for what's occurred. Sometimes it takes years for them to determine what occurred. And sometimes, ultimately, what happened and who did it is right before their eyes, because they evaluate who had reasons, who had the knowledge, who was with Victoria the night she disappeared, who had the opportunity, the last person to see her, who would benefit when she was gone, who would save money from not having to pay for her medical insurance, her dental insurance, who would save money because there wasn't a WPS bill, as you heard. Gone. I hope you picked up on that in this case. Gone. It's the word that from the beginning, when Wes pulled into that driveway, sees his dad pulling in, thinking it's kind of weird, that when he meets up, gets out of his car, the first thing Jim says to him, "Mama's gone." That word is pivotal in this case. As the searchers are looking, taking time out of their schedule in Pulaski, they probably had other things to do. As they show up and they see Jim sitting in his recliner, drinking beer or mowing the lawn, as they're trying to find Victoria. That searchers testified that they heard him say, "You're wasting your time. She's not coming back. She's gone." The fact that at the time that witness number 2 testified before you, somebody who didn't know Vicky or Jim before this case, somebody who didn't see TV because they were in the hole before it happened, somebody who testified that Jim told him, "Yep, she's gone." At the time, I think people didn't understand the magnitude of it, and there were a lot of questions by the defense about that. What are you looking at first? What's a missing persons case? And that's what it was at first. And in retrospect, the truth, as we indicated in the beginning, the truth is in the lies. And it wasn't until those lies surfaced that we were able to see more clearly about what had occurred. Now, as I indicated, the presentation of this case was on purpose. Some people might have wondered, wow, those witnesses that you called, everybody this week from the ex-wife who's able to document a prior history of a violent nature, somebody who's told her that if she would leave him, that she'd never get out there alive, that you heard from both witness number 1 and witness number 2, both eerily saying that the defendant told them separate times, not together, he's 100% certain that Vicky's not coming back. And he's 100% certain that she's dead. Well, I think a 5-year-old could tell you that when somebody says they're 100% certain like that what both of those witnesses surmised was true about that statement was Jim knew Vicky was dead because he caused it. Now, in the opening statements, as I indicated, the state just presented the facts as we believed that they would be. And the defense indicated from the beginning, oh, this is really a case about the family not being happy about how my client grieved. Well, I listened to that, and then I listened to the case. I didn't really think that's what I heard in this case, but I'm going to let you evaluate that, and I'd like to help you do that as I walk through the witnesses that we called in this case. The first witness we called was Officer Christine Bilgo. In the presentation of our case, we wanted to call who's the first responding officer coming on the scene, laying out for you what scene. And from the beginning, looking at what Officer Bilgo said, they're dispatched there in reference to somebody who is missing. And she arrives, and who does she see? She sees James Prokopovitz. And who is James? He is the husband of the missing woman. She explained to you, she picked up right away that his calm demeanor as he's meeting with her, and I don't disagree with the defense. Everybody could grieve differently if they were grieving at all. But the attitude, and we played that for you. We wanted you to hear with your ears, because you are the trier of fact, what they were talking about on that date. And Christine Bilgo indicated that at the time that she is meeting with Jim, that she thought it was odd. What did she say she thought was odd? Thought it was odd he doesn't say, we need to find my wife. Do you recall that testimony? She indicated that that was something. There was no urgency. If the spouse is missing, typically with family members, they want to find them. They want to get out there. That Jim said, and this was significant, he had control of the pill bottles. If you recall that initially in that testimony, that is significant. He has control. And through all of his interviews, there's a couple, he got a little loosey-goosey on, well, yeah, but maybe, she knew where the key was if I had it locked. Other interviews, he said he was the one who dispensed it. I remember listening to him again as we did the trial. I put him out in the morning and I put him out at the night. What does that mean? That means control. Jim, quite frankly, couldn't keep his story straight with all of his interviews, but I'll allow you to recall that. But Jim at that time describes depression with Victoria. As we indicate, we're here to offer the truth to you and let you evaluate it. That she did have depression, and he encourages that she may have been suicidal. But then he concedes, well, she was good. We were at the doctor that day. She was good. Even the doctor was impressed. She was dressed up, got up, went to the doctor. She was good. Christine notes all of Vicky's personal belongings, and that's important. This purse, which her family identified as belonging to her, one of the most difficult things for me to have to do in this case, because you saw the emotion on the face of her 3 kids when they saw this purse, a purse they knew she used, they knew she had with her. It's an extension of her. And to put this exhibit in front of them and have to have them identify that, you saw the reaction, and that was powerful. That all of the things that were in this purse, from the phone, from her license, from her Social Security card, from all the personal cosmetics and items in there. And something I didn't expect until Marcia was on the stand and explained it, that prayer card that said, don't quit. Probably the attitude of how Victoria really was actually on that date. And we'll talk about that when I talk about Stacey's testimony. That Christine notes all of Vicky's personal belongings. The purse, she even testified, I wrote it down. A woman takes her purse. A wallet, driver's license, phone, her glasses, her cigarettes, some of the things that were left near her purse, not in it. Her pets, her 2 cats, and her bird. More importantly, she left her life, if you'd believe that. And that was kind of the problem with this case from the beginning, because her life included her 3 children. Wes, who had been badly burned as a young person, really as an adult, relying heavily on his mom, even to the point, as Wes said, that every morning she'd even yell for a cup of coffee. They were close and they were tight, and this case has been devastating for him. And when Marcia testified, and until Marcia stated that on the stand, I forgot. There's something Victoria left behind that gives you a really good insight into this case. You heard Marcia say she left her dentures, her teeth. If you want to believe, ladies and gentlemen, in any way that this woman ran off or went somewhere and would have taken off like that, you're not going to think that she went out in public like that without her teeth. So we called Officer Bilgo, who notes this is a missing person case. Looking for Vicky, says time is of the essence. And then we called Merle Cornelius. Basically, the state calls everybody and anybody who might have information. Why? Why did we call all these searchers? By the 5th canine, you were probably like, wow, because we have to show Victoria's dead. And the only way we can do that is to show that, as the officers testified to, and quite frankly, the defense conceded, these are fine officers who did everything they could. I think the phrase was, look under every stone, to make sure that they looked for Victoria. This case wasn't just about holding somebody accountable for the fact that she is gone. They wanted and had hoped early in this investigation to find her alive. But as the evidence came in, the witnesses came forward, and the crystal ball became clear, they determined that wasn't going to happen. So Merle Cornelius, as we called him, from the state's perspective, he's just another officer we're calling. He's not one of our most pivotal witnesses until he was. And that was actually based upon the defense question to him. He said he searched with his canine, but that the demeanor of the defendant was different. And on cross, and sometimes this happens, where our case comes in through the defense, not because of anything I was doing, that the defense asked, but in some missing person cases you respond to, people, they all react differently. I think there was a scenario where he talks about a missing child. And counsel's like, yeah, but that's different. That's a missing child. And Merle said, no, sir. On a missing person case, in all my years of experience, everyone's anxious. And again, the defense, well, really? Like, everyone's anxious? Virtually every time a family member is upset. Is that going to ring with something else you heard? Remember when you heard from Sherry Jo Lucas? She was the rapid search. I remember then when I heard that, after Sherry testified, Sherry's description of every time she's somewhere also, that people are searching for answers. And remember that too, because she will tell you by the demeanor of Jim Prokopovitz, he wasn't searching for answers. The state then called Rick Kurth. This is all still the first day. He testified he thought the defendant's behavior was odd. He was the supervisor for Christine Bilgo. He arrived on the scene, and he completed the call because it was the end of the day. But what Rick said, and I wrote this down, I'm like some of you that write things down, or I'm just older and afraid I'll forget, wrote the focus of this is if there is somebody out there, we just need to get them help. He explained to you that his focus arriving on scene, as he said it's very common they have these missing person cases, is to see if somebody's out there that they could have fallen and they need help. You ended up hearing that there was nobody out there and they didn't find Victoria. Towards the end of the day, on the first day, we called the first family member, Stacey Deer. And what is so hard when I do these kinds of cases is the fact that I'm having to call people with the most raw emotion, because this, at times, is a case, but not to this family. This is their life, and this is their mom. And I had to ask them a lot of questions. I had to show them a lot of evidence. And I don't think having to testify under those circumstances in front of, at the time, it would have been 15 total strangers, is something that feels very good. Stacey said something even as she testified. Again, State just asks questions about relationships, tries to get at the truth to help you see it. When Stacey said, I said, were you close to your mom? Yeah. Remember her response? She was the maid of honor at my wedding. I didn't even know that till she said that. She was close. She described how she went rummaging with her mom, crafting, driving around, just having fun. So clear that she loved her mom. But I asked it anyway. Did you love your mom? Yes. What types of things did she miss? What did your mom miss in all these years now? She proudly said that she had a 2-year-old grandson. She also told you that her mom would have loved to have seen that. And again, Stacey, I asked her, the state doesn't run away from the truth. I said, there's this statement that your mom said, and remember this, ladies and gentlemen, because it's gotten lost in this trial. Your mom made a statement 10 years prior, so that was 2003. After she did have a suicide attempt, the state is the one who brought that information in. That she made this statement that the next time she did it, no one would find her. And did you hear Stacey's response to that? She did. She made it to me. Stacey ended up learning. She had also said it to Wes, who had found his mom that day. But she said her mom, when Stacey called her about a work friend who had some suicidal issues, that her mom said, I really didn't mean it. Sometimes I say things I don't mean. Regardless, that was 10 years prior to when Victoria went missing. I don't know if all of you can remember what you did 10 years prior with respect to that, but maybe something you said you didn't mean either. But the defense would hold Vicki to that, even though it flies in the face of the defendant's own words from the beginning. She was good that day. No problems. She was good. Now, Stacey concluded our day then on that Monday. Day 2, that Tuesday, we called Wes Edges. Why was Wes important? Wes was important because he's the son of Victoria. He lived in that house. He lived with Jim. He knew what was going on in that house when he was there. But you saw him. He's an adult. He has a life. He indicated there were times he was off with his friends, even staying at other places. I think the defense wanted to convince you, no, he's there all the time. I actually think I heard Jim in one of the interviews say Wes was sleeping a lot or sleeping the day away. Whatever was happening between Vicki and Jim, as in any household, isn't necessarily in front of the eyes of Wes. Wes was important because he outlined a time frame. And it's not really a time frame different than Jim's. Jim, from the beginning, told officers, I had this doctor appointment with my wife, came home from work, gives a little bit of a different story about calling her from the phone. We heard the phone forensics. But that ultimately, he's stopping at Super Ron's, he's picking up the chicken, he's coming home for dinner. Wes also corroborated. They sat down for dinner. It's he and Jim and Vicki. And I think, as I listened to all the different testimony, It's about 6:30 that this is happening. But that after dinner, and in Jim's first interview, he also says, oh yeah, and then Wes left. Now there's an interview or two in there where I'm starting to hear him say, oh, maybe Wes didn't leave. Well, he said from the beginning Wes left. Wes was alibied out through the photos on his phone and the statements of witnesses. Wes left that night. But Wes testified to something pretty important, and it's going to come into play when you connect witness 2. Wes told you that on that night, he had earlier agreed with Jim. Mom seemed good that day. Mom was up, dressed, going to her appointment. But he testified that during that dinner, that there was some discord, that there was discord between his mom and Jim, and it was over a tablecloth. And you'll note, ladies and gentlemen, and the defense got Wes to concede this, and we'd agree, that Wes had gotten along fine with Jim. Jim had been a father figure. Prior to all of this, Jim had been a father figure to Stacey and Marcia and Wes. That on that evening, Wes said he heard that little squabble about the tablecloth, but he's going off for his night, and he didn't think a lot of it. But ladies and gentlemen, it plants the seed for what you're going to hear later from witness 2. So remember that. That Wes describes his relationship with his mom, that he indicates that he loved her. She had been a source of support after his horrible burn incident, and that while he is in this hospital, and Marcia corroborated that Vicky even moves herself down there for approximately a 5-month period to take care of Wes after he spiked that fever with that infection when he first got there. That's devotion, and that's love. And that's what Wes lost when his mom went missing. So Wes indicates that he left for the evening. We heard about his night, and that he's coming home. And as he's coming home, I think that he was time-stamped at the gas station a little after 4. I think he's coming home around 4:30, 4:20 by that time. That Wes is testifying that as he's pulling in the driveway, he's coming down the street, and there's another car, headlights coming at him. And that as he pulls in the driveway, as he's coming, he sees a truck pull in the driveway, now realizing it's his stepfather, Jim, and that he pulls in behind him. He told you he thought it was weird that he's out this time of night driving in, but as he gets out of the car, his stepdad, his dad, he called Jim Dad, walked up to him and said, "Mom is gone." There's a discussion about looking for her, and Jim says he's going back out looking for her, and he leaves. An interesting fact, and I don't know if you caught it, that Wes indicated that he went in the house, and after about 15 minutes, Jim came home. Jim told officers in numerous interviews that he just proceeded on to work. And that's interesting, because if you recall those interviews, and this is where those forensics on the phone became really important, there is this description by Jim of all these phone calls. And I hope you listened to that. Many phone calls. Oh yeah, I called her phone. Not even once, like 2, 3, lots of times. The whole purpose of the phone forensics is there is that one call at 4:07 to Vicky's phone. He's not calling Vicky left and right, and the state would submit that we believe he was probably calling Vicky's phone to find out where it is, because he knew Vicky was gone, and he wanted to find out where that phone was. That Wes indicated that then he went to bed. A vigorous cross about, well, you didn't call. He didn't. But she also heard Wes being a little forthright. He was over at a friend's house watching TV, first with Kelly Williams and her family, but then he went over to his friend Ronsman's house, and he smoked and bought a little weed, returning back near his house around 4 a.m., 4:20 after he stopped at the gas station. He had been up all night. He was probably tired, and he did go to bed. He also, it shows the faith he had in his stepdad. Mom is missing, that right or wrong, Wes went to bed thinking Jim had taken care of it. But then, and finally, Wes indicating to all of you, as we asked him the questions, as I showed him his mom's purse, as he was identifying her belongings, how devastating this whole loss has been for him. That's insight, ladies and gentlemen. That's insight into the truth of this case and what occurred. And then you heard from Marcia Loritz. Marcia, who not only has attempted to take it upon herself to tirelessly look for her mom with her siblings, that Marcia has gotten involved statewide and with her organization nationwide in trying to help other people, recognizing that this is a grief that she not only experiences with the loss of her mom, but that she can share her insight and assist others with her foundation. Marcia, who outlines as the oldest child of this family, the older sibling to Stacey and Wes, what her mother's been through as well. Marcia outlining the fact that her mom had been abused previously by their dad in a previous marriage. But Marcia indicating that even with that, Vicki wasn't telling people. She wasn't walking around telling everybody about what had occurred, that she kept that to herself. Marcia, who outlined as they grew up, how Jim was a father to her, how at some point when all of this happened and she assisted, she found out her mom is missing, she arrives on the scene, she's organizing searches, that she's overhearing her father immediately talk about getting rid of her mom's belongings. That Marcia, who's organizing the searchers, is hearing the fact that Jim is saying, she's gone, you're wasting your time, she's not coming back. And Marcia testified she overheard him say, she's dead. That's significant, ladies and gentlemen, because how would Jim know Vicki is dead at that point unless he was involved? And the third witness was Michael Shue. Now we get the McKeefrey employees coming as witnesses. A nice family business, been around in the Pulaski community. Everybody that came forward, subpoenaed here to testify, all cooperating and coming. That Michael Shue told you he's a part owner of McKeefrey, knows the ins and outs and knows the operations. That Curly, Jim Pro-Kopovitz, is an employee, been there for some time, and that he also rents Mike's dad's house, Frank Shue. He testified, and we asked him about this specifically, that all the McKeefrey employees knew of the quarries and the sludge pond in the area as part of their employment and part of the landscape. That the defendant himself, and I asked Mike this about access, the defendant himself had keys over to the sand pit area, that he had access to the sludge ponds, that he was aware there was no video out by the sludge ponds and no video out by any of the quarries. And the fourth witness, Kim Sheedy, the secretary at McKeefrey, knew Curly. Her testimony was disturbing. Curly inquired within a month of Vicki going missing, taking her off his insurance, health and dental, but ultimately had to wait till fall, as some of these plans are, before he could officially do it. Ultimately in fall, the minute he's able to do it, Vicki is taken off of his insurance. He benefits. She gave some numbers, financial benefits. And the fifth witness, Trooper Joshka of the State Patrol, the drone operator, another agency involved, all trying to find Vicki. We moved to day 3 on that Wednesday. Now we start calling the searchers, the lay people that have come forward, first with Julie Smith, a lay person assisting in the searches, asked if defendant was one of the people searching. Answer, not at all. But then there's more. A question by ADA Sanders, what did defendant do when you arrived? She said, I was bringing food, a meal for the family, and asking where the search party was so she could join it. And what did the defendant do? The defendant shut the door on me, closed it, as she was there to help. Rhonda Schmidt, another layperson, coming forward, assisting in the searches, watching the defendant's attitude, testifying the defendant helped, testifying the defendant making these disturbing comments. A state then called Scott Simons. He indicated he was the one checking on the time cards. Why is that important? Because we want to verify the time frame Jim Prokopovitz had in this case. 5:31 a.m., he checked into McKeefrey. 12:35 p.m., he checked out. Calling Mark Blazer, McKeefrey coworker, Mark testified he thought it was weird Jim wasn't looking for his wife and came to work. Why was the state bringing private citizens with these comments? Why were we calling the coworkers at McKeefrey? It's a really important part of presenting our case, because one of the things you look at in these cases is what is reasonable. What is reasonable doubt? What are reasonable actions? What is it reasonable to believe happened? Every citizen that was coming before you, whether they were a coworker of Curly's for years and maybe even liked him, under oath, when they had to tell the truth, were testifying. I thought his actions were weird. I couldn't understand why he came to work. I couldn't understand why he wasn't out searching for his wife. That's important, ladies and gentlemen, because that's reasonableness, and that's what you decide in this case. Then we called Joe Kasich, again another searcher. We called John Hill, calls himself Jack. Kind of important witness, because he also, all the McKeefrey witnesses, yep, we all knew about the sludge ponds, we all knew about the quarries, had access. He also testified, and this is important because this goes to the info from witness 2, that he was familiar with the composite of the things in the sludge pond, and that some of the ash was caustic and would burn your skin. Goes to what you later hear from Rich Jones about the biodegradable nature of what's going into these sludge ponds, why they can't be dredged, and why the substances in there would be such that if something was in it, it wasn't coming out. We then called Stephen Hilliker, again, another McKeefrey employee, Dawn Baguki, another McKeefrey employee, all testifying. Why did we call each of the McKeefrey employees that were on the forensics of Jim's phone? We would ask each of those witnesses, do you recall getting a call from Curly on that day? Some did, some didn't, but they all agreed that if it was on the phone, then they did. Wouldn't have been unusual. Why is it important? All the McKeefrey employees told you, this man went to work. This man who's supposed to be worried about his wife, and he tells no one his wife is missing. All the people he talked to. We called Sherry Jo Lucas. I think why she was so pivotal, besides the fact she was so fascinating with the work that group does, the People in Pause group, People in Pause, that she indicated something that was so riveting. And again, this was under cross-examination by the defense. When she is asked about her observations by the state, and the defense asks a little further about what she sees, her quote, and I wrote it down, I just have not dealt with family members that don't need answers. And then she pointed out it was the defendant that appeared to not need answers when Marcia and the other kids did. Again, ladies and gentlemen, intent, knowledge. Why wouldn't you need answers? Because you know what happened. Then we called Richard Jones. That was the individual by Zoom. He was an important witness because all of the McKeefrey individuals, they knew about the knowledge of the pond. They knew about it. Now, Richard Jones is the Georgia Pacific person. He's the supervisor. He knows the access. He knows where things are. He knows the composition of the sludge ponds. What was so important about Richard Jones is he acknowledged, yep, all the McKeefreys, they had the employees there, they had access to these sludge ponds. But more important, and it's something that actually came up again in testimony today, this was not an area that could be searched. It couldn't be dredged. It couldn't be looked at the way the quarries would. It couldn't be searched. Part of that can lead you to the truth, ladies and gentlemen. When somebody says, there's no way you're going to find her, you can't find her, and they're certain, there's only certain ways you could have gotten rid of them or put them. And then we called Sergeant Tim Thomas. Why? We wanted to explain to you that officers checked all the hospitals. They were checking for Vicky. They were searching. Boots on the ground, canines, horseback, drones, underwater sonar, divers, aerial, visually. And in a town like Pulaski, a small community, by word of mouth. Nobody heard from her. Nobody saw her. Vicky wasn't there anymore. And then in the second week, on Monday, we called Dr. Ahmed, a very important witness, somebody who give you insight, a treating psychiatrist, about the treatment that Victoria had had with him through the years. And I took notes on him as well, because Dr. Ahmed was a psychiatrist testifying that he sees 26 to 34 patients a day, that he saw Victoria for approximately a 5-year period. The fact that he stated that some people can live with mental illness and lead a normal life. I think that is one of the tragic things that came out of this case, is any inference that somebody that would have mental illness or depression is a little different. And really, what it's about, ladies and gentlemen, is they're a lot more vulnerable than a lot of people, and people around them would know that. He testified that through the years that the information he was receiving from Vicky outlined that Vicky described an abusive relationship with her husband, that Vicky talked about concerns that he was womanizing, the fact that she didn't like his alcohol consumption, and that a notation of she stressed out due to her husband. But what was really pivotal is him testifying he never saw Vicky to the point that she would cross that line. And that's what Dr. Ahmed said. Is it consistent with Jim and Wes on the last day they see her? Yeah, it is, because they told you Vicky was good. And then we heard from Larry Warwick, super interesting, approximately 47 years of law enforcement experience down in the Milwaukee area, surrounding areas, and now a private investigator. I thought his interview, when we played that for you, was really important. Now you see that law enforcement is taking any opportunity they have. They're not arrogant, thinking they're the only ones can look at this. Hey, there's a private investigator. The family thinks maybe we should have him take a look at this. And Larry told you he did it for free. That Larry just assisted because Sherry Jo Lucas asked him. And Larry indicated that at the time that he interviewed this defendant, that he had concerns about his answers. And one of the things that was important was Larry to highlight that he was very worried when the defendant said, no, 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 about whether there had been any argument or disagreement with Victoria. You're to rely on that. That's someone that's been doing this a long time. He described how it's really important in investigations to know what a suspect says, how they say it. And he had concerns. Why? Because Jim was trying to distance himself from any discord with Vicky the night she went missing. And then you heard from Tim Newtalls, Al Snover, Heidi Thaves, Chuck Keene, DCI Joe Welch, canine officers, drone guys. A couple of them talking about hits that happened on the quarry. But the state concedes Victoria still wasn't found there. And I hope some of you watched the defendant's attitude, because that's one of the first times I saw him getting a little excited. And you are supposed to watch things in the courtroom and keep track of what happens with that. But I thought it was interesting because he was pretty animated when they testified. Would it mean that Victoria was there? We didn't find her. Would it mean that he actually knew she wasn't? And he was kind of riled up with the inference that she was. And then Tuesday, we called Kelly Walters. Why is she important? Really? She offered you information that Wes was at her house with her family the night this happened. She corroborates what law enforcement already knew and had heard. She also humanizes Wes and tells you about the fact that she even knew he loved his mom and was close to her. And then we had Sarah Youngs. Sarah took the stand. Sarah, who was one of the only friends that the defendant, you heard her name in 2 interviews of Jim, that the defendant identified as Vicky's friend, the coworker from Super Ron's. And we did play the audio interview that was done with her. She didn't quite recall what was said. She did recall Vicky indicating that there were concerns about Jim having an affair and messing around on her. That's important because all of that is still going to go to what witness 2 told you the defendant said about this night. And then Nikki Yankee. Why was she important? Well, it's a little fact to some if they don't know the case. It's a super big fact to those that do. The fact that she took a photograph, and now you recall Christine Bilgo, we purposely asked her, did you have the opportunity when you walked through the house with Jim, the morning, actually by 1 o'clock, afternoon that Victoria's noted missing? Yep. Christine, what did you notice about that bed? That it was perfectly made with like a dozen pillows artfully arranged all over it. And why is that important? Because Exhibit 84 shows you, we had Nikki identify, when you did the search warrant, you get a picture of the bed that belonged to Jim Prokopovitz. Yep. When you look at the condition of this bed, this is what the bed would look like. And we asked Wes if he ever would see Jim make the bed. No, not really, my mom. Why is that important? Jim never slept in that bed the night Victoria went missing. Jim was busy getting rid of Victoria, and that's why that bed is important. Tyler Bailing, he's the one who outlined, forensic analyst on the phones. He outlined those phones. He cross-referenced Vicky's phone, Wes's phone, Jim's phone, finding out a time frame when everybody was around that house. What's important with that is he was clear when ADA Saunders asked him about, these phone calls as you analyzed Jim's phone. Were there multiple phone calls? And no. There's that one phone call to Vicky. I think also he did note 2 different numbers later in the morning to Vicky's old line, but none of the calls that Jim says. One interview, he says, oh no, I called her a couple times before I left for work. Another one, he says he was calling her constantly from work once he's there, probably to justify why we already knew he didn't talk to anybody about her missing. Those phones became much more important in this case. Laura Johnson, a brief witness, seemed like a super sweet lady. She's the sister of the defendant who hadn't seen him for 30 years until he sent her a card when her husband passed away. And then the only other contact that I could see from her testimony was that he was using her for his own means when he's ordered to have no contact with Kathy Friday. And that sweet woman who was on the stand unknowingly is asked to break the law and send letters and make calls between Jim and Kathy, both of who had a no contact. These are two individuals that didn't just lie under oath, ladies and gentlemen, and commit perjury. They were violating court orders, and they just didn't care. And it was due to that obsessive relationship they had. And then that leads us to Jennifer Friday, who told us all about that obsessive relationship. So tragic. This isn't just about the tragedy that happened to the Prokopovitz family. It's the tragedy that happened to the Fridays. Because of the relationship that Kathy Friday got herself into, an upstanding, proud of her reputation banker from the Wausau area, getting involved with this defendant, and it leading to the fact that you heard the stipulation, she ended up committing suicide. Jennifer told you how she got along with her mom. Sounds like a normal family. She had a couple kids. Mom's coming to graduation. Mom's coming to sporting events. But that all changed once the lies started between Kathy and Jim, once the deception started, the two phones, the secret phones, the secret Jim line she heard, and how raw the testimony that she sadly had to offer about the demise of her relationship with her mom and literally the loss of her mom because of her relationship with Jim. Jennifer's really important because by outlining the lies, the deception, the fact they had these secret phones, that they were lying about the relationship, when it happened, when it occurred, even to their close friends and family, it starts giving you indicia of what was really going on here. There was a motive. It was a motive for Jim to get rid of Vicky and gain benefits. And sadly, we even had to ask about the sexual benefits. You probably wondered, why was she asking about the pornographic picture of Kathy's vagina next to the bed? Because it goes to the obsessive relationship. Why were they asking questions about the fact that Jim hadn't been sexual with Victoria for some time due to her health issues? He lost all that companionship. He lost those things. And now he was about to gain it all with Kathy Friday. And then you heard from Darlene Ingalls, probably one of our most pivotal witnesses, because she verifies the information that Victoria is already talking to her psychiatrist about. That Jim is someone with a temper, that Jim is abusive, and that you've now heard he engaged in the same conduct with his former wife, Darlene. Important. Quick to anger? Darlene, yes. Big drinker? Yes. Is there a trigger for his anger? Yep, alcohol. Telling you that at the time she did leave him, and the defense wanted to say, oh, she ran off with another man. She conceded. She's real. Yeah, there was somebody when I left. Didn't you read between the lines? It's probably someone who helped her get out. She told you, this defendant told her, you're not going to leave me alive. She left with the clothes on her back, and we're happy to say that that is a wife of Jim Prokopovitz that is still alive. And then on Wednesday, Lisa Mastey, the daughter of this defendant, these people are subpoenaed, have to come give truthful information. She talked to you about how she was close with Victoria. That's her stepmom, how Victoria babysat her kids. We asked her, did your dad know about the sludge ponds? Yep. Because of his work at McKeefer? Yep. Did your dad have access? Yep. She said her husband had even worked there for a time. No videos. Her dad had the keys. And then we heard Jason Friday. The insight Jason offered is he lived with his mom, Kathy. Now, the defense kept trying to elicit, yeah, but there's no paper records. There's no records to corroborate what your mom said. Kathy Friday told Jason in June of 2013 that she had been dating him for 6 months, which Jason post-dated back to January. And the audible guess from the defendant with respect to this, ladies and gentlemen, Jim doesn't like it when you say something that he doesn't like. And I know you saw that during the trial. And remember that when you're in your deliberations. That at the time, Jason is close to his mom. He's living in the house, spends a lot of time with her, watches her animals. And that mom said it began in January of 2013. Jason, vigorous cross. Well, isn't it true that there's not phone records? The ones your sister got in May show it as May. Well, that's also interesting. The phone records do start that we had acquired in May. Did you just hear the last video of the day with the interviews where now Kathy and Jim are talking about July and 4th of July? Well, if the defense wants to hang their hat on when the phone records began, it's already a date that the defendant's lying about until he gets confronted with the truth. And that's the problem with this whole case. That when this defendant doesn't have evidence in front of him that he believes will concretely show what's happened, he just lies. Because you saw all those lies in those first few interviews of Jim Prokopovitz. You heard the lies of Kathy Friday until they went before the court in evidentiary hearings, and we asked them questions, confronting them with proof and evidence about their lies. Then they had to tell the truth. And it wasn't till Jim was told in an interview with law enforcement, Kathy's already telling us that you guys are lying, that he then admitted it. Once again, worried about Kathy. And then you heard from witness number 2. So important, so real. Somebody who came before you corrected me when I made a statement about the pods in the jail and where they are, and is it 1 cell or 2 cell? And he's like, no, that's not it. And he corrected me. That type of levity, that type of information from someone like that, when the defense tried to crack a hole in what he's saying and saying, yeah, you saw this on the news, TV, they cover this case. Nope, just got out of the hole. There is no TV there or newspapers, no media. He didn't know about this case. And then he explained to you why you can also believe that. The fact that when he got this information, he didn't even believe it. Jim just kind of looked like a guy who might be on there in a drunk driving ticket, he told you. But that when Jim explains he's there for murdering his wife, but he's 100% certain that they're not going to find her, that that he is sure that she is dead, that even to this witness, that just doesn't sound right. So he asked a little bit more, and he asked him about what he meant like that, about how he was sure. He said he encouraged and asked the defendant about, well, why wouldn't you just go to the police then? Why don't you just say where her body is? And this, ladies and gentlemen, gets you to intent. Because if it was anything other than intentional, people come forward. If something's an accident, you come forward. If Victoria had gotten rid of herself, you'd come forward. But if you kill somebody and get rid of their body, that's intentional. That's the only thing a no-body homicide can be. You've used the intent. You intentionally caused the death of another. In this case, you're also disposing of that. It's intentional, ladies and gentlemen. And how do you know that? You know that through the words of witness number 2. That he indicated that as he starts talking to Jim, well, why wouldn't you come forward? Jim said, no, why wouldn't you just show them where the body is so they could run these blood tests? Very graphic, very real, very descriptive, very detailed. That's how you find the truth. And that the witness said, they can find the body, and then they can figure it out. Nope. She's dead. They're not going to find a body. And if they do, no blood, no teeth. No blood, no teeth. Somebody that has that graphic of a description of what happened to somebody clearly committed an intentional act. There's nothing other than intent with something like that. And the fact that he said 100% sure they wouldn't find the body, and even if they would, they couldn't identify her. What's also scary is the fact that the defendant told him he was going to beat the case and he was confident that the wife's body would not be found. Now, the defense has raised something about, well, but in his statement, he's saying this happened years ago. It did. If you read that statement, Jim is telling witness to this in 2019. When Jim is telling him, yeah, it was years ago that my wife starts telling me we have a dispute because she believes that I could be having an affair and that it's death till they part, and told her, and now think of this, ladies and gentlemen, this links you to the truth and tells you that he told his wife that the only way that she would be leaving him was in a garbage bag. He told Darlene Ingalls that the only way she was leaving him is if she was dead as well. This is the riveting detail that leads you to the truth in this case. The fact that he further indicated when witness 2 asked him, well, how did it happen? Well, could have been an overdose on pills. Could he have drugged her, just like Marshall Loritz found her in November of 2012? Maybe. Or, he said, could have been strangled. Do you recall Darlene Ingalls talking about how he had choked her? Jim is leading you to the truth with the statements that he told witness number 2. Did he drug her the way he did in November? Carry her off? You heard his dimensions. He could have easily carried her off. Would there have been a sign of a struggle or disturbance? No. Could he have strangled her? You heard about the officers who indicated that when they've responded to those types of offenses, there's not necessarily any big disturbance when you strangle someone. Do I have to show which one of those happened and how that happened? No. Because those aren't the elements. I don't have to show that mechanism. I have to show she's dead. I have to show he caused it, and I have to show he did so intentionally. You've got a couple avenues to find that he did that, and that is by the defendant's own words. Ladies and gentlemen, who had the motive, who had the opportunity, who was responsible for Vicky's disappearance? It's no longer a missing person case, it's a death investigation. And we know that because of what Mr. Prokopovitz has said. This case would have been enough without those words from witness 1 and 2. And witness 1, as I indicated, corroborated Jim's still saying 100% certain his wife is dead and she is not coming back. That would be enough. From the state's perspective, that would be enough evidence. But then you have to consider who, by their own words, told you they have access to the sludge ponds. They have access to quarries. You heard from Rich Jones, the sludge ponds, if somebody's in there, they're not getting out. You heard the defendant, no blood, no teeth. And who would have gotten involved with another person as quickly if it wasn't predated, which the state submits there's evidence to, before Vicky left, if it is just 2 weeks after, as there are phone records that indicate? Who would do that? Wouldn't they worry about their wife? Wouldn't they be looking for their wife? Wouldn't they want answers? Not if they benefited from her being gone. They moved on from where she was gone. They wouldn't look for answers. They wouldn't look for the truth. They would hide the truth. And in this case, ladies and gentlemen, that would be enough. The state believes we could prove this case with that, but there is more evidence. It's the fact that Kathy Friday and Jim Prokopovitz took it upon themselves because they knew they had something to hide. And again, even a 5-year-old would know, what do you do if you do something wrong? Can you lie about it to avoid detection? They intentionally conspired and lied about the relationship, full known, and we don't even have to prove a motive. That's not on our list either. But that the relationship was the motive, they had been involved and in contact for years, and Jim was ready to move on, and that's exactly what he did. So they went into the Brown County Courthouse. They were sworn under oath. They told the judge lies when questioned by law enforcement. They were confronted with their lies, and not just 1 year. They told him 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, up until those evidentiary hearings. 6 years of lies. They get on the stand. Due to the inconsistencies, due to the evidence, due to the fact there's a video that Jim never looked for his wife that night, when confronted with all the clear and consistent evidence that they were lying, they both confessed and admitted they did it. They gave full and complete statements to law enforcement, admitting they conspired together, that's the conspiracy, that they committed perjury, those are the lies, that they committed obstructing. All of that, ladies and gentlemen, comes from them. So when the court instructs you that credibility of a witness, how do you determine who's telling the truth, who's giving a lie? You look at their demeanor, you look at their motives, you look at the benefits they'd have. You look for something you do every day of your life, who's giving you a line of bull. Because this case, ladies and gentlemen, as we said from the beginning, that the truth is in the lies. It's the lies that Jim spun. It's the lies that he told to everyone. It's probably at some point the lies he started trying to convince himself had occurred. The best evidence in this case has now become the defendant himself. Everything that he said. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask you to follow the instructions of the court and seek the truth in this case. The truth is, there are 4 counts before you. If you believe the evidence in this case that has come from lay people, family, friends, law enforcement, searchers, the community people from Pulaski, you will find that the defendant is guilty of all 4 of these offenses. We would ask that you search for the truth, and with the truth is that he is guilty of all 4 of these. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a recess now before the defense argument. All right. Question and recess.
How long, Judge? How long?
Huh? No, I'm not.